I'm Josh Rubin. I primarily practice in architecture and development, construction law, New York State labor law, a lot of contract work and insurance coverage, and also general insurance defense. I went to Alleghany College. I graduated in 1999 with a political science major and minors in English and fiction writing. As part of our college academic experience, we had to do a senior thesis, and my choice for my senior thesis involved the Scottish Wars of Independence of the 1200s. And then after that, I went to law school at the University of Baltimore, graduated in 2002. I think it was when I was in college, I took a lot of political science courses with a professor named Robert Sedig, and that's really when I started to become interested in that. A lot of the courses that he offered were constitutional law courses, and I didn't realize this at the time, even though I was interested in it, but very, very few people actually practice constitutional law, but that was really my gateway to the profession. Those cases that are most memorable to me are those where all the lawyers act professionally, act collegially, act in a very sportsmanlike way, and just do a very thorough and effective job for their clients. You know, the goal of this job is to be as effective as possible, regardless of what that means. And whenever I see any good lawyering in a sportsmanlike way, those are the cases that I tend to remember the best. Outside of work, I try to keep it pretty simple. You know, one of my life philosophies is that if you overextend your personal responsibilities, you tend not to do anything that well. And so I try to keep it pretty simple between family and kids, work responsibilities, sports and athletic stuff outside of work, and then, you know, friends and hobbies to the extent that I have time to be able to manage all of those things. Because the goal is to, you know, make your time outside of work quality time. I can actually give you two. So legal tip number one, involves some of my background. So I do, like I said before, a lot of stuff involving developers and architects and construction companies and basically building stuff. And you know, when something goes wrong on these sites and an investigation needs to be done, I often tell people you need to be as thorough as you possibly can from the outset, right afterwards. So my suggestion often is, regardless of what's happening on the site, whatever work is being done, shut it down right away. Sequester everybody who's there, get their names, get information and statements from them, take pictures, take videos, and document everything as best as you possibly can. And I often make the recommendation, contact your attorney. Get your attorneys down there with a court reporter to start getting sworn recorded statements of people to make sure that you can preserve information as soon as you can after something happens. And so what I often find is companies down the road are trying to recreate something that happened 3 years ago. If you've done your work at the very beginning, if you've done a thorough accident investigation, sometimes it prevents litigation later on down the road because everything was so thoroughly documented, and what's been documented shows that you and your company have no legal liability for anything that happens. So I would say that's tip number one. Tip number two is, part of our job is risk prevention and risk allocation. And one of the ways that's most effective to do that, and it can apply to construction jobs, it can apply to architectural firms, it can apply to trucking companies or really any business, is to try to use contracts effectively so that you can limit your financial responsibility to situations where there might be some legal liability. And I usually explain to people like this. There is a difference between legal liability and financial responsibility. Even in situations where you can be legally liable for something that happens, you can sometimes use contracts to transfer the financial responsibility for that legal liability to somebody else. And how we do that is between companies and between people. Before something goes wrong, when you're establishing relationships between companies and people, is use contracts. And you can use them in such a way that companies can transfer their financial responsibility for things that happen to somebody else just by writing a good contract. So I say, be proactive in your contractual and business relationships, because sometimes it can benefit you later on down the road.